Kevin McCarthy?
That's a good point. But we have to remember in the U.S. system that it's important for them to get the job done. That's why we elect these people in office. But based on what's going on, it appears that McCarthy is going to lose as Speaker of the House. But it's also important to remember in the U.S., the Speaker of the House doesn't have to be a Republican. It could potentially be a Democrat. I don't think that's going to happen. But the Republican Party is divided. It needs a marriage council. And basically, the marriage council will tell them probably that it's time to get a divorce. And maybe that ultimately what will happen, that the far right party will create some other party for itself.
Just a word on the Democrats who decided today they weren't going to support Kevin McCarthy, and I've set out the reasons why they wouldn't do that. There's not a lot of trust, let's face it. But at some point, they may have to get involved in this. How important is it that they are seen to be responsible?
I don't perceive that they're being responsible. So when we have to look at it, we have to remember about the vote that happened about the shutdown, that every Democrat supported it except one, that they did not want a shutdown, and that 70 Republicans voted for the shutdown. The Democrats want the American people not to have financial problems, and the shutdown would not only hurt the U.S. economy, but would hurt the economy throughout the U.S. The Democrats want to work with the Republicans and continue to try and do so, but this is a creation that the Republican parties have created for themselves by Matt Gaetz getting on the floor and to oust the Speaker of the House.
Okay. Well, I want to sort of compare and contrast with what is going on here on the right in the UK. I mean, one of the reasons they struggled to pass a spending bill last week was because Republicans think too little is being allocated to the southern border, at least those on the hard right, and to border control, a theme that the Home Secretary Suella Braverman was picking up today at the Tory party conference in Manchester. Have a listen.
The wind of change that carried my own parents across the globe in the 20th century was a mere gust compared to the hurricane that is coming. Because today, the option of moving from a poorer country to a richer one is not just a dream for billions of people. It is an entirely realistic prospect.
We're far too squeamish about being smeared as racist, she added, to properly bring this order to this chaos. Well, in the midst of that speech, a heckler was escorted out of the conference hall for challenging, quotes, some of the nonsense the Home Secretary was telling conference. That heckler and those quotes come from Andrew Boff, the London Assembly member, 50 years a Conservative. Here's how former Cabinet Secretary Sir Robert Buckland responded to that speech.
I think we've got to be very responsible about the language here. I think talking about hurricanes or weather extremes isn't helpful unless you explain the why. And we know what's happening in the world with climate change, with war in the sub-Saharan part of Africa. We are seeing mass movements of population. There is no doubt about that. That poses a huge challenge to all of us in Europe. But we need to talk about the why before we start using alarmist language.
Adam, do you see some similarities emerging here? I mean, obviously, we're talking about this in the context of what is happening in Washington tonight, but there's no doubt that the hard right have much bigger priorities than spending in Ukraine, for instance. They're focusing on the southern border. They don't like the fact that money has not been allocated to that problem. And we're starting to see how that is pushing the debate further to the right here in Europe and particularly in the UK.
I think what's common in both cases is that even though these voices might appear to be quite extreme or quite fringe, what they're doing is speaking to a concern which actually is quite mainstream. So if you look at the UK, when we poll the public, the top 5 concerns that they raise are pretty similar, pretty common. Cost of living, NHS, the economy, and immigration is always there at number 4 for the general public and for Conservative voters. And for as long as more mainstream politicians aren't being seen to deal with it, whether that's illegal migration, the small boats that are coming across, or legal migration that was about 600,000 last year, then some of these calls from the right of the party, from both parties in the US and the UK, will receive a large audience.
Just bringing in Kelly on this. I mean, the president of Mexico, Kelly, said today that there are 10,000 people coming to the US border every day. Do you think, when you stand back from the shenanigans in the House of Representatives, that there is some of this that is at the root of what is going wrong in the Republican Party?
Well, I believe that every country has a right to protect their borders, but there needs to be reasonable solutions. And so we have to look at U.S. history and under what president there was that aided other countries that needed assistance. And that was under Obama, that gave other countries aid in order to assist them due to the financial issues that they had in their country as well. So there should be reasonable solutions, whether you're Republican or Democrat, that can come up with an idea to resolve this situation.
Adam, obviously there are deep divisions on the right. There are some who say we're seeing something similar evolving at this Conservative Party conference in Manchester. Fairly lacklustre event, the critics would say. The former leader Liz Truss complaining yesterday that they're losing because her party is not conservative enough. And then we had this. Yeah, that's the former Home Secretary Priti Patel dancing with Nigel Farage last night to the tune of "I Can't Take My Eyes Off of You." Someone we know who prefers the sanctuary of GB News, much like Republicans will only speak to Fox.
I do also want to welcome some more friends here tonight. Our friends that are here, the newest, most successful, most dynamic, no-nonsense news station, and the defenders of free speech. That is my friends at GB News. Thank you for everything that you do.
Then there was this really interesting piece, Adam, in the New Statesman today, that there is a feel at this conference of a party preparing for opposition in danger, said the article, of being co-opted by the hard right in the same way the Republicans were split by the Freedom Caucus in America. Is that a fair comparison, do you think, Adam?
So I think there is a really big debate that's going to happen here on the right, on the centre-right, if it is that the Conservatives lose the next election. And one of the really clear voices in that debate will be some of the ones you've heard. They'll be very loud on immigration. They'll be very loud on having low taxes as being a priority. You've seen the Conservatives, when they previously lost elections, moving towards some of those voices. The really important thing to make sure that we don't end up with some of the polarization we've seen in the US is that there's a really strong voice from the kind of centre-right of the party, the more one nation wing, that tradition of the Conservatives, that's saying, of course, we need to control migration, of course, we need to get taxes in line, but we also need to make sure we tackle inequality, we get growth occurring, we deal with some of the big regional inequalities that we have in the UK. I think we can avoid going down the path that the Republicans have gone down. I think we've got a very different media climate, we've got a very different way of funding our political parties, but the risk is there. And look, the Conservative Party is a big tent, it's had these debates before, and I think it can have it in a way that is civil and is constructive.
Some would say, Kelly, that the hard right in America is in the grip of a terrible fantasy, of course, which starts with Donald Trump and the lies that he tells. But it is driven by Fox News and Newsmax and by Trump supporters. And there are signs of that kind of politics evolving here. And if you don't believe me, then here are two really clear examples from the last 24 hours that the critics would point to.
You said it's no wonder Labour seems so relaxed about taxing meat. So Keir Starmer doesn't eat it, and Ed Miliband is clearly scarred by his encounter with a bacon sandwich. Did you write? You didn't write that, did you?
I did actually write that. I think, you know, it's good to have a light moment in your speech as well. But the point is actually...
They're not proposing a meat tax.
The point is actually very serious.
No, but there are proposals out there for 15-minute communities, 15-minute cities, and I think people are worried that this is an infringement on their liberties, on their freedoms, on their ability to choose where they go to access services, to access what they need, be that shops, etc., and all the rest of it.
That was the Energy Secretary, Claire Coutinho, trying to defend claims that she made on stage that Labour's planning to introduce a meat tax, almost a direct lift from the conspiracy theories in America that Joe Biden wanted to remove your beef burger to save the planet. The other clip there was reaction to Transport Secretary Mark Harper's claims that local councils are trying to dictate how often you go to the shops or ration who uses the roads, similar to Republicans claiming that the radical left wants to control every aspect of your life. And that's the point, Kelly. There are echoes here of what is happening in America. We are picking it up, and eventually the splits start to take us to where we are tonight in the US Congress?
We are a divided country, but I think it's important to understand that we should agree and we can still be non-disagreeable with each other. Diversity is what makes our country great in the U.S., and there can be compromises if parties work together to help the American people, and that's what the Democratic Party does. It's fascinating that Trump is most likely going to be the Republican Party nominee, where was indicted twice, and he's facing all types of allegations. He's been impeached twice, indicted 4 times, and right now is going through a civil trial as well. Hopefully that Biden will win in the next upcoming election and we can move forward during these times.
Adam, the reason I bring all this up is because you start to see these splits emerging on the right at this Tory party conference in Manchester. We had Liz Truss yesterday trying to get signatories to reject any budget, I guess, in the spring that doesn't have any tax cuts in it. And that's why it just sort of struck me today when you look at what's happening there in the House of Representatives and what's happening here at the party conference. There are very distinct echoes, and there is a danger, is there not, that in opposition, the Conservatives start to drift further to the right?
So I think it's really important to distinguish between a couple of things here. Yes, there is a strand of the British Conservative Party that emphasises freedom and low taxes. That has always been there. You saw that in the relationship between Thatcher and Reagan. This other narrative of the kind of conspiracy theories that might be similar about Britain and the US, I think, look, the Energy Secretary made a joke at the start of her speech. The 15-minute city stuff, yes, there's some rhetoric there, but in reality, there are no real policies coming out from the government to block 15-minute cities.
But there was plenty
or
in there.
anything
There was plenty in the Prime Minister's rhetoric just the other week when he was talking about his green plans. He was pointing to things in the Labour plan that wasn't there, and that's the similar tactics to what we see in the United States. And look, there's always been the bending of the truth in politics, but these outright lies that are supposed to scaremonger and to confuse the electorate, that is something different, isn't it?
I don't think so. So I think that look, I personally wouldn't have had the long list of things that were scrapped, but I don't think they were lies. I think they were exaggerating what essentially were things in documents in organisations like the Climate Change Committee. They're a reasonable interpretation used for political reasons. Here's the really important point. If you look at US and UK political culture, in the US you see massive polarisation and denial of basic truths. Let's look at the vaccine rollout in both countries. In the US you have massive swathes of the Republican Party unwilling to engage with medical fact and adopt their vaccines, hospitals that are now opening that are part of the medical freedom movement. You don't see that sort of thing in the UK. I used to live in the US. I think there are huge affinities between the two countries, but I don't want to overfit their political culture on ours. I don't believe we have the same level of conspiracy theories, and I don't think they're being perpetrated by members of the cabinet.